There was nothing out here, and it was quiet and it was chill. You could tell it was undiscovered. And that was really cool too, to kind of stumble onto this really funky, but weird, sort of sketchy, sort of unknown place. But it had this really eclectic mix of artists and Marines and desert folks.
Hi, and welcome to the Desert Lady Diaries podcast, 30-minute conversations with women who have found their home in the Mojave Desert. I'm Dawn Davis, and this is episode 134. There's more information about the podcast at the website, desertladydiaries.com. And to engage with guests, listeners, or me, follow and like Desert Lady Diaries on Instagram and Facebook. In 2002, Melissa Grisi visited Joshua Tree National Park for the first time and was called back again and again until finally making the permanent move here in 2015. Melissa is a licensed clinical social worker and therapist, trauma-informed yoga teacher, and artist. Melissa recently opened a private psychotherapy practice called Blue Sky Therapy to provide quality, accessible mental health care to our high desert community. Melissa, fellow Jersey girl, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you and chat with you.
I'm glad you're here. And let's remind me again where in Jersey you are from.
Well, I'm from Sussex County is what I tell people. So the tippy top northwest corner of Jersey.
Isn't there a place up there called Allendale or something like that? Or is that a little more east?
Jersey's so weird. It's so small. Yeah, all these little towns.
I wouldn't have known a lot about the other towns unless I grew up in Central Jersey in Somerville. Okay. And my first full-time real job was working as a car rental agent at Newark Airport.
Oh my God.
So,
the stories you must have.
Yes, ma'am.
Wow. I was like, we need to plan a time to talk about that.
People coming off planes after having too much to drink, wanting to rent a car. It was really, and then the, Yankees and Mets would fly in. So that was kind of fun.
Wow.
But we had to offer directions to every customer. And so I learned a lot about a lot of places and a lot of interstate highways. So yeah. Anyway,
I'm off. So I grew up near like the Delaware Water Gap, 80 West out that way. People typically know that part. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. The woods of New Jersey, they do exist.
Right.
Yeah.
I worked for a bank for a long time, and I did a road trip when I was in North Carolina. One of the ladies from a call center in Jacksonville, we went to Jersey to do a road show. It was a bank merger that was happening in Philly. So we were going to talk about the department that we worked for as a potential for these folks who would be reapplying for their jobs. And we had time one morning, and I said, I'm going to take you on a little ride down to the Jersey Shore. And she said, oh my gosh, if you didn't take me down here, I would have thought New Jersey was just all like those big gas tanks by the airport.
Oh, no. There's so much.
Between the Northwest and the shore,
the shore is the best. The shore, the Jersey Shore. I lived down there a little while. Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. Yes.
All right. So we're a long way from the Jersey Shore.
We are.
And you came out here for the very first time in 2002. Was it just a vacation?
So he was my boyfriend at the time. We were living in San Francisco, and I was working at Amoeba Records and had access to this whole musical library. And we got super into alternative country. We had made some friends, and they were in the alt country scene. And so we discovered Graham Parsons and got super into Graham Parsons and like the time that he was out here with the Rolling Stones and all that. So we decided, we made a decision to move back east, but we were going to do this road trip, and it was going to be like a musical road trip. So Joshua Tree, stay in the room where Graham Parsons passed, go visit, where they took, do you know the story about Graham Parsons?
Cap Rock. Yeah, but somebody listening might not know. So
okay.
A little bit. Yeah,
Graham Parsons was a musician, and he used to come out to Joshua Tree and party, and there's like scandalous stories about his coming out here with the Rolling Stones, and he died at the Joshua Tree Inn. And you can stay in his room where he died. But what happened is after he passed, his body, I think it was at LAX, I guess he must have talked with friends about being cremated out in the park. So his friends stole his body from the airport, drove out here, and then tried to like cremate him out at Cap Rock. And there used to be a memorial back in the day. It's no longer there, but we wanted to make a pilgrimage to honor Graham Parsons. So that's why we came to Joshua Tree. It was part of our musical road trip. We stayed in the room, we went to the memorial, and we just were like, what is this place? I mean, it just blew both my boyfriend at the time. It's just fun to say that he used to be my boyfriend. Now my husband. It just blew our mind. I mean, we just had never experienced anything like it.
What do you think was part of that? What brought those feelings up, do you think?
Well, I remember just the sky at night, that desert sky, and seeing the stars like that for the first time. And I had lived out west before. I went to college up in Lake Tahoe, so I feel very connected to nature in California, but there was something about this desert, this specific desert, and just, I don't know, I believe that some people come here and they just experience this connection with this place and see and feel the sacredness of this place, and that was just our experience. I can't quite put it into words. It was just this overwhelming just peace and also insignificance. You're really not that important. You look up at that desert sky and you're just like, I'm just this little grain of whatever. Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, that was the experience. And it was just really cool. In 2002, and I know there are people who have been out here way longer, but it was very different. I mean, there was nothing out here, and it was quiet and it was chill. You could tell it was undiscovered. And that was really cool too, to kind of stumble onto this really funky, but weird, sort of sketchy. I love gritty. I love like some of the places I've lived. Like I've lived in places that I've lived there right before they kind of blow up or get gentrified or whatever. So you stumbled into this sort of unknown place, but it had this really eclectic mix of artists and Marines and desert folks and criminals, if you will, people who are just kind of on the outskirts of society. You could feel it, that energy.
That's probably a reason that they come out here, because they know they can be undisturbed, undetected. That's a thing. But I agree, similar feeling, the grittiness, the strangeness, the weirdness. Yeah, I feel often, even after coming here, when I did just 4 years ago, actually this week, I signed my lease to move. I felt like I got here too late. Like I missed all the good stuff.
Yeah. I felt like that. I mean, I'm grateful that I even got here in 2015, because even in the 5 years, how much it's changed. And, I know some of the people that were here way before me, they are part of who inspired me to make the move. And just like you hear the stories from the people that were here before. I'm glad I got to at least experience, because we came back again and again after that initial experience. So I'm glad we continued to come and really got to experience before it became a scene,
Right.
But I do still feel the sacredness of it. That has not been taken away, even with how popular this area is.
Well, and I think because it is so vast and it's so wide, and there's so many hidden places that you can find those moments of the silence. For me, it was the silence. It just brings me to tears still. I love it. Yeah. It's beautiful. Yeah. So from your first visit in 2002, I love too that both you and Ben had that same feeling about it. That's just beautiful. So did you decide we've got to go back here like once a year, or when did it happen in those numerous trips that you were like, you know what, should we just move here? How did that go?
And it's funny you say that about Ben, because when I met Ben, we were living in Providence, Rhode Island, and he was like total city, Ben's like old punker dude, city dude. And I was like, I didn't even understand how I ended up in cities. I'm like, how did I end up in Providence, Rhode Island of all places, which is amazing and lovely. But like, even when we met, I was like, I need to get back to nature. I need to live in nature. And he was like, I'm living in cities. We're going to have to figure this out. And that was something that was so powerful, because we came out here and he fell in love with it. He tells stories about how, of course, he would hike in Doc Martens, because that's so Ben, but he wouldn't take the dust of the sand off. He would leave it on his boots when we got back east and just let it, like, he wouldn't wipe it down. I mean, he was so connected. So we both found this place in nature, and that was part of it. He was like, I think I could live here. So then we got married and we chose Wonder Valley as our honeymoon. Could have gone anywhere, but we wanted to come back to the
Some
desert.
people would hear that and go, what?
People do. They're like, are you crazy? So that was 2007. And I remember at our wedding, you know, people always ask you, like, where are you going on your honeymoon? And we would just say Joshua Tree, because we knew no one would know what Wonder Valley was. And people were like, Joshua Tree? What's that? I mean, even in 2007, people didn't know what this place, at least in the East Coast, people did not know what it was. So we rented this little adobe out in Wonder Valley, and we spent 7 days out there, and it was the most romantic. Just talking about it gives me butterflies in my belly. It was so romantic. We had a pool, and it was just the two of us, and we rented a Mustang convertible, which was so fun. And we just, typical desert, we'd set out. Oh, and it was August. So it was dead. That's also when the summers used to be dead out here, for real dead, not like.
Right.
And so we just had all these desert adventures. Like, I'm on the side of Potter, and there used to be a pottery co-op in Old Town Yucca. So we like stumbled upon that. We met this potter, and she was like, oh, you should go to Garth's. Have you been to Garth's? And we're like, what's that? Garth's, now it has a geotag, you know, but we're like, we can just go to this guy's house. She's like, yeah, you show up. And so we go out there, and we have this adventure out at Garth's. Do you know what Garth's is? The Boulder Gardens out there?
I've heard of it, but I haven't been out there yet.
Yeah, it's so cool. It's so cool. But it was just this, like, and we, you know, we'd go to Pappy's, and there was nobody at Pappy's, and we just would sit out under the stars every night out in Wonder Valley. And that was the first time that we were like, maybe we could move here. Maybe we could live here. But, you know, first of all, I mean, Ben and I, we are East Coasters. As much as I want to be a cool, mellow California, like, I am an East Coaster.
I feel the same way, yeah. I need some conveniences.
Yeah, and just the flavor, you know, that's been, and we'll probably talk about just some of the challenges. That's been a challenge for me, missing the I call it the flavor of the East Coast. But so 2007, I just graduated with my master's in social work, and I was starting the social work career, and like very rooted in the Providence community. And Ben, I think at the time, he had just started a job at this really cool school as a children's librarian. We had community there. So we're like, I don't know, this would be a big move. Like, but it was the first time we thought, wow, what would it be like to live out here? Maybe we could do it, or at least buy something. You know, back then it was $10,000 for a little shack out in Wonder Valley or in 29. So that's when that kind of started on our honeymoon out here.
So then what was the final straw? Like, was it on a trip that you were here and you were like, we need to start looking at real estate? Or were you one of those folks? I know that there have been a number of people that I've talked to that have like bought sight unseen.
Both. Yeah. So we went back, and we were always talking about Joshua Tree, so much so that I think that we definitely annoyed some of our friends back there, because we were always talking about, like, oh, Joshua Tree, oh, the desert, oh, Joshua Tree. And actually, and this is funny, we had this great little 1930s bungalow back in Providence that we had bought, and we ended up renovating the backyard. And it was like, people would come and they're like, this is like, we're in Joshua Tree. It was all like pebbles and sand, and we had a pergola, and we had a bunch of stuff I'd bought at the swap meet out in town in Yucca. I had a bunch of stuff like coyotes, and it was so Southwest. And our friends were like, why don't you just move there already? Like, you made your backyard into like as desert as you can on the East Coast. And then we came back in 2013. We came out in March, and, you know, there's nothing really like specific that stands out, but it was just, I was so ready for a change. I was so sick of living in a city. I mean, I am not a city person, and I was so over it. And I just wanted, like you said, the quiet. I mean, I was really, I was working so much. The life of a social worker, you kind of do work a lot anyway. And honestly, I think a lot, it's just because we're so passionate about what we do. We're like, I can do this, I can do that. But I was working a ton, and it felt very much like that rat race, although it's not like we had money or anything like a big, we had this tiny little bungalow, and life was good. But I was approaching 40, and we were looking at moving somewhere else in Rhode Island where I could build a pottery studio and have a little land. But with that came an enormous mortgage and a commute and all this shit that I was like, this is not who I am. We don't have kids. We're not going to have kids. What are we moving to like a suburb for? Like, this is not. So we came back. Oh, and I do remember this, our last night. Well, I remember I was crying because I didn't want to leave. I remember that. We were at the hotel and I was crying and I didn't want to leave. And I must have picked up a desert newspaper and there was an ad for a social worker at the High Desert Medical Center.
Oh my goodness.
And I thought, oh my, wait a minute, I could get a job here. Because Ben and I, we're not trust funders. Like, we have to work, we have careers, and I wanted a job, and I wanted a job that I would be exciting for me as a social worker. But I was like, what do people do out in the desert? Like, what do people do here? So that was the first time I'm like, I could work here. I could have a job. I could do what I do. So then we went back, and then a whole bunch of stuff happened, but it was in the end of 2014 that we were like, we got to do something. So we started looking at real estate in Rhode Island, and we were like, again, this is crazy. There were just a couple things that happened in our life that we were like, look, it's now or never. We got to do this. If we're going to do it, let's do it. And I applied for a job on the base as a clinical counselor in their counseling center. And I got the job. And that was May, actually right around my birthday, the beginning of May. And like 2 weeks later, our house was on the market. We bought a house sight unseen over the internet. Never saw it. My husband just said, I could fix that house up. And we bought this house and packed up the car and the pets and a pod. And July 13th, so I got the job offer May 1st-ish, 2015. And July 13th, I was showing up on the base, which is a whole other story and probably a whole other podcast. But yeah, ready to go. Wow. Our house in shambles. Like, we bought this house as is. My husband gutted it, renovated it, all while I'm working on a military base. Like, 2 days we were in our house and I started my job on the base. So
wow,
it was crazy.
Yeah.
But you know, it was just like, we pulled up to the house. We drove through Arizona. So we took 62 in from the east.
Oh yeah, that's a great ride though.
Oh yeah, so cool. And so like getting you like, yeah, we're like, you were getting there. And I asked the realtor, we hadn't closed yet. And I said, can we just go see the house? We hadn't even seen it yet. And we were buying it. And she said, of course. So I remember we pulled up to our house and I jumped out and I was like, this is my home. I mean, I just that same sort of connection and just like, this is where I'm supposed to be. This is my home. And I just felt, even though it was in shambles when we bought it, absolutely in love with our land. I mean, we have an awesome spot. We got an awesome spot out here. And, you know, it's just one of those things with the desert, everything just
falls into place.
It's just like.
And especially once you make that commitment, once you say, I'm doing this. Because for me, same, it was 3 months. I had been here in April of 2016. Left here, did all kinds of research online. I came back a couple of times to make sure I wasn't like romanticizing this whole idea of living in the desert. Because like you, living on the East Coast, I decorated ever since I moved out on my own. Every place I ever lived had Native American print, this, that, and the other thing, little Adobe things, all kinds of Southwestern business. Yep. And here I am, you know, and I came in here and I looked out the window and I looked at the property manager here and I said, I feel like I've been preparing for this my whole life.
It's crazy how you manifest and you don't even realize. So I went to college in Lake Tahoe and I studied, my undergrad is a bachelor's of fine arts with a concentration in ceramics. So that was a whole other thing, moving from Jersey to Lake Tahoe. And I never pretty much left Jersey. That's a whole other story. But I had this art professor, ceramics professor named Julie. And she was this cool, at the time, seemed so much older. Now she probably wasn't that much older, but she had gray hair. She wore in braids and she had a pottery studio in the desert at the, like, so if you go, you know, go down like the mountains from Lake Tahoe, you end up in the kind of Reno area, desert area. And she had a clay studio down there. And I just thought she was the coolest woman and being. And I remember, and so I was 21 the first time I came west. And I remember thought, I'm going to have a clay studio in the desert someday. I'm going to do it. I'm going to have a clay studio. And like, never. And then here I am. And I have my clay studio in the desert because we built a little clay studio on our land out here. So it's just wild, these little seeds you plant and they pop up. And then there's that thread of, wow, I manifested that. So it's like, be careful. Sometimes be careful.
Right. I remember growing up as a young kid, I would think about, you know what, I'm going to live in California someday. I thought about that. So you're right. It's just, you speak those things and they happen. So thoughts are things.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Yeah.
speaking of Wild Hope Handmade is your pottery studio. Melissa now has her work in Soul Connection, which I'm really excited about.
Yay, me too.
You have a lot of really beautiful designs, things that say be kind and things like that. Where does your inspiration for your pottery and artwork come from?
Yeah, I would say it really comes from my work as a therapist and as a social worker. The lessons that I've learned and just the honor of doing the work and being in space with people. So for a long time, my pottery has been a release or like a meditative practice. Doing the work that I've done, there's been moments of real intensity because I do a lot of trauma work and sitting with people, just all of it. It's beautiful work and I cannot imagine not doing it. It's my calling. But you need space from that work, and self-care is a huge critical piece if you're going to be effective and like a normal healthy human being at all. So pottery has really been a big piece of that. It's been very private for me for a while, and it would be a space, especially when I was working on the bass, it was a pretty intense environment I was working in. So my studio just became this like
sanctuary.
Yeah, absolutely. So you'll see with the carving, that's really like a meditation practice for me. I am so in it when I'm doing that work. So the kind of language that comes out onto the pieces, I would say my work, but also my yoga practice. The three are beautifully connected. My therapy practice, my yoga practice, and my art, they all go together. I can't really tease out one from the other. They all really layer and complement, and the more that I do all three, the more I see that connection and how they overlap. Yeah, I could keep going, but I'll stop right there. I'm tangential.
Well, I do want to ask you something, and it might seem like an odd question to be asking, but I feel like the climate that we're in as a nation, I see, I limit my news and that sort of thing, but I sense that there is something going on that is causing people, and it's not just now, it's been happening, I don't know, for the last maybe 10 or 15 years, where people take everything that comes at them as a personal affront and react from what I would call a place of base instinct. I watched the news the other day, and a man walks into a store, is asked to put on a mask, and pulls a gun on a clerk that's just being at the door asking him to wear a mask, and probably gets $10 an hour. Or the jam up the tunes and everything's, whether it's on the metro and they don't use their headphones and everybody is subjected to their foul language music. Any insight on that? I mean, those are the things that keep me up at night. Why? What has happened to civility and common courtesy?
Well, we could talk about this for hours and hours and hours. I just to briefly touch on it, I see that we are living, especially right now with the pandemic, but have been, that there is a collective trauma that we've experienced. And, the word trauma is used, it's a buzzword now, and everybody's a trauma expert because they read Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps Score and they go on Instagram. But trauma is something I've been studying for almost 20 years, and trauma is common. We think of trauma as the big traumas, combat or an accident or abuse, but traumas can be the day-to-day poking, kind of just these events that kind of break us down. And when you look at the prevalence of trauma, most of us have experienced it on some level, but we don't live in a culture that allows for the space to talk about it and heal from it. It's just pull up your bootstraps and keep going. There's no time, there's no space for this. You've got work to do. Hustle, 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 right? So now we find ourselves living from this reactive, that the emotion is truth or emotion is fact, So when you talk about reactivity, that's what that is. That's just emotion. That's impulse, that's emotion. There is no choice when I am just coming from a place of emotion. Instead of allowing for pauses to come from maybe another place, or at least recognize. But we haven't done the work as a culture or allowed for the space to process. It's just keep going, just keep going. Or that's not really a trauma, or that's not really a painful event. Like, you've got it so good. Just, or just be happy. The spiritual bypassing, that's a whole other conversation. So I could get into this, and it's a lot of the work that I do. I mean, a lot of people who come see me, it's because their past traumas and how they're showing up now. But a lot of the work right now in the pandemic this is triggering a lot of people because of past events. What I can offer is, and this might sound really simplistic, but it really does begin with each and every one of us. What is this about? How can I work on my reactivity? If we can all slow that down and do some healing, the ripple effects truly are infinite. I mean, they just flow out and ripple out and ripple out. They begin to touch other people. So if I'm less reactive, then you'll be less reactive. Our nervous systems communicate. So if I'm dysregulated, right, you're going to pick up on that, and your system's going to become dysregulated, and so on and so on. And we're living in a really dysregulated time, right? From leadership down.
Well, and it's interesting you should say that about picking up, because really still going even just to get my groceries is, I wouldn't say it's a nightmare, but I just want to get in and get out, especially early on when people were in there panic buying.
Yeah.
And I had a little job I was doing where I needed to be in the market for, say, an hour or two. I left there like,
you were dysregulated.
Yeah, I just was taking it. I could feel that energy off of these folks that were in there in panic mode,
Yeah, that's absolutely it. That's our nervous systems communicating with one another. And think about, too, this is tapping into all of our different degrees, but for most of us, a survival response. So now going to the grocery store is like, I've got to survive this. I mean, you might not be recognizing that cognition or that thought, but your nervous system is saying this is life or death on some level. And so we've all kicked into this survival mode, which then sends us into fight or flight. Yeah, it's very interesting, because now we're all experiencing it, instead of in the past when people have had trauma and other people haven't quite gotten, like, well, why do they show up that way in the world, or what's wrong? We've pathologized it. But now we see, oh, this is it. This is what it's like when my nervous system is in this survival response, and everyone around me is in it. So we're all dysregulated. Right. So then you have, some whoever pulling out a gun, and I'm not excusing or justifying that behavior at all.
Right.
But when we look at a trauma response in the nervous systems and all this, we can begin to understand more why people are behaving the way they're behaving. It's an interesting time to be living in. It's a very interesting time to be doing this work, very validating. All of this stuff that I've known and been studying, I'm seeing it. And I'm just really hopeful from this, we can really engage in collective healing. Right now it's a collective trauma, and then the collective healing may already be beginning. I think we still need to get to the other side of this, whatever that looks like. And then hopefully there will be time and space, and our culture will begin to allow, and our society and the systems will begin to allow us the time and space to heal, because we're going to need it.
Yeah,
we're going to need it.
Yeah. What was it that drew you to social work?
Oh gosh. So this is really funny. My mom is a social worker, and growing up, so my mom though was a child protective services social worker, and my mom is about as Jersey as you can get. Like, you do not, like,
don't mess
she's
with her.
Still, oh my gosh, I'm like, Ma, you can't talk to people. I mean, she's just no Jersey. I don't give a shit. I don't know, that's my mom. Part of that, she needed to be tough. The work she did, she was in the field for about 15 years, which is unheard of in that line of work. So anyway, growing up, she used to say, don't ever be a social worker. Don't ever be a social worker. And so when I decided I wanted to become a social worker, I remember I called her and I was crying when I decided to apply for graduate school. Ma, don't be mad at me. I know you told me not to be a social worker, but I really want to be. She, of course, was so loving and supportive about it and really happy that I chose this. But, I come from a long line. My grandmother was an ICU nurse. My grandparents are World War II veterans. They both joined to serve. My mother was a social worker. My father worked in public health his whole career. And it's just that's just the value in our family system of being of service.
Mm.
And in my late teens and 20s, and for people who knew me then, I was super self-righteous and super just like obnoxious, but I just was very angry about the injustices that I was seeing all around me, around class and race and all of the systems. And I was out protesting in the streets and, yelling at anyone who would listen. And then I was like, this is not working. This is not working. I need to get into the systems to make change. And so that's really where that's why I think anger can be a really powerful motivator for good if you allow it. And that's really, I was angry. I was pissed. I was pissed at the systems. I was pissed at our government. I was pissed at seeing people hurting in a country that has more than enough resources. And so I thought, I'm going to be the change. And so I went to school, and thankfully I went to a super radical progressive, which fit me perfectly, social work school, where they broke you down, and then, built yourself back up. It was very much an experience and journey of self-awareness around my own stuff. And so here I am 17 years later. Well, I mean, in the field of social work, I've been a professional, if you will, social worker for about 15 years. I mean, it's who I am. I care about people.
Well, you want to stand up for them, and yeah.
I believe in people. I believe that we all have our stories where, and that's the beauty of who we are, but also some of those stories and experiences have harmed us, and everyone is deserving of freedom and to live a beautiful, joyous life. And so if my work can help with some of that and the ripple effects, I very much believe in that. I mean, that's why, I worked on a Marine Corps base for 5 years, and that's a whole other thing around being out here. My experiences in the desert, that's a huge part of it, is working on the Marine base out here. But I believe in those ripple effects. I created a trauma-informed yoga program on the Marine Corps base, bringing yoga to Marines, populations who wouldn't otherwise have access to yoga. Everyone is deserving of that. Just because you don't have the money or the socioeconomic status, or your body doesn't look a certain way, or all of it. So it all plays in together as to why I do this work. This is another thing I can talk about forever and ever and ever. I'm really passionate about things.
Yes. And that is probably a lot of what carries you through, because it's not easy work. As you said, it's difficult, and you have to make those boundaries and separations, so you're not carrying all this home with you. And so good for you and thank you for the work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's
congratulations on your new private practice, which you're doing in 29 Palms, which is awesome. bluesky29.com if you're looking for blue sky therapy. So I want to thank you for taking the time to be with me today. And before I let you go,
okay,
we have to do the jar.
Okay.
And if you're listening and you're not familiar with this process, these questions that Melissa will answer are part of Diary Unlocked. And Diary Unlocked is exclusive content available to Patreon supporters of the Desert Lady Diaries podcast. So if you would like to hear Melissa's answers to these questions, go to desertladydiaries.com, click on the support page, and sign up to become a patron. So I'm going to read the questions, and then we'll come back on the other side and answer them. Who or what inspires you? How do you define generosity? What's the last gift you gave someone? And what gets you out of bed in the morning, which I think we've just had a big conversation about. So if you're listening and you want to hear Melissa's answers to those 4 questions, again, just go to desertladydiaries.com, click on the support page. There's also a video there that explains what Patreon is, what it does, why it exists, and it gives you the ability to sign up there to be a patron. And then you'll have access to the entire back catalog of Diary Unlocked episodes back to, I think, January of 2019 is when I started it. Thanks again for being here today. I really appreciate it and what you're doing. Thank you.
And thank you. And if it's okay just to say, you did a podcast with our friend Melanie Buck about 2 years ago. And I just want to thank you for doing that and what you're doing. But that podcast especially is so special to me. And Melanie was a friend of mine, and that you captured her beauty and her radiance. And I'm just forever grateful to you for doing that. So thank you.
Thank you so much. She was probably the second person I met when I first came to town. I wasn't even living here yet. So yes, she was also special to me as well, and to many people in our community.
Many of us, yeah.
Thank you so much for mentioning her.
Thank you.
This week, I have a shout out to Yvonne, who stopped into Soul Connection this week to pick up her book for the big read. It was great to meet you and your son, Yvonne. Thanks so much for coming in. The book Yvonne was picking up is called Lab Girl, and the Morongo Basin is again fortunate to be chosen as a big read community. The Big Read is funded by a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, and the grant money allows the book selection to be available to the community at no cost. So if you're a resident of the Morongo Basin, come to my shop, Soul Connection, to pick up your free book. If you'd rather do a curbside pickup, send an email to soulconnectionjt@gmail.com and put Big Read in the subject line. Curbside pickup is during regular business hours, which are Thursday 1 to 5, Friday and Saturday 11 to 6, and Sundays 11 to 5. Soul Connection is located at 61877 29 Palms Highway, where El Reposo meets the highway. You can pull into the parking lot entrance just beyond Zandalions to enter the enclave. And you can be sure to get every new episode of the podcast by signing up for the new episode newsletter. Go to desertladydiaries.com and click on the newsletter button to sign up. Thanks so much for listening.